Welcome to the fourth in the special program series that we've been doing for the Executive Leadership Institute of the University of Tennessee and for the Tennessee Higher Education Innovation and Leadership Fellows Program. I'm delighted that you're joining us. I think this is going to be an interesting program. Innovation never rests, using large-scale data to assess skills taught to match skills sought. And this is now going to be the first in a series of two involving the overall concept of data analytics using large-scale databases and applying that in decision-making. I'll let you know what the second program is after this program. What I'm particularly pleased to introduce to you is Emsi, E-M-S-I, as I used to know it. We have a storied history together back to my days as president of Slippery Rock University of Pennsylvania. And those folks have been unbelievably generous to me, and today's an example of that. So I want to welcome Joshua Frank. Josh is the senior account executive with Emsi. He and I have been working since October to put this program together. And with that, Josh, I'm going to share screen over to you and let you begin. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introductions, Dr. Smith. We really appreciate having the opportunity to present with you. I'm seeing some familiar faces and then a lot of folks that I haven't yet met. So I'm really excited to be here presenting to you on this topic. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And so the topic today that we're going to be discussing is, like Bob said, this concept of innovation never rests and data-driven higher education. And so just a quick also introduction on the call as well. If you look carefully in the gallery, you will see someone whose name is Morgan Halpert. He's a coworker of mine. He's going to be manning the chat box here during this presentation, so that if you do have any questions that come up that just can't wait until the end, feel free to drop it in the chat, and then Morgan can send you a link or answer your question. Or if you want to just keep a running tally of any questions that come up until the end, you can do that as well in the chat box. And everyone can see my screen, correct? Great. So this concept of higher education and a data-driven higher education, I want to start by just giving a quick outline as to what this overall presentation is going to consist of. So we're going to start off with just brief introductions to who Emsi is and the kind of work that we do with higher education institutions. And then we're going to move into some overall trends that we saw in Tennessee as a whole in 2020, looking at some of the ways that despite the high unemployment trends and despite 2020 being a, needless to say, turbulent year, some of the shifts and resiliency that we saw in Tennessee, and then connecting that to some larger trends that we saw this past year as well. That's really been an acceleration of some national trends that we've seen, and then move into a shift in the education narrative that is really mimicking that shift in the workforce that we've seen. And then lastly, talking about some work that we did with the Executive Leadership Institute and the relevance that that has for you all in your pursuit to be the next higher education leaders, as Lori has so appropriately demonstrated for us here on this call. So to start off then, so Emsi is a data analytics company. And I know that sounds a little convoluted and confusing, but what that means is that we engage with higher education institutions to help them use data to make strategic decisions. And what data that we're working and what data we're providing is data on the external labor market. So what's happening in the economy? What are the occupations and industries that are trending and shifting? And how do we use labor market data to better inform and connect people, education, and work? And how we got our start is pretty key to where we are today. So I don't want to give you a history lesson, but at the same time, we started about 20 years ago seeking to answer the question, what does a higher education institution bring to the regional economy? And so we're located here in Moscow, Idaho, which I'm not sure if you're familiar at all with northwestern Idaho, but we are kind of in the middle of nowhere out here in Idaho, but we have two major state universities. So we have the University of Idaho right here, and then right across the border in Pullman, Washington, we have Washington State University. And then beyond that, there's pretty much nothing for quite a while. And so this concept of higher education institutions being important contributors to the regional economy has been near and dear to Emsi's heart for quite some time. And really, we set out to further this premise, or to prove out the premise, that higher education institutions are economic engines for their region. And so as such, by paying attention to labor market trends, the theory is not only that we can understand how higher education institutions supply their regional economy with innovation and programs and economic development and advancement, but also in that paying attention to regional, the trends that are happening in your economy, you can actually further advance your mission as an institution. And so there's really kind of three main circles here that we're looking at when we think of people, education, and work. Emsi has a few different data sets that correspond to each of these. And so when we think of people, we actually have a data set that's on professional profiles coming from online places like LinkedIn or resume databases, more niche networking sites like Behance or GitHub, pretty much anywhere where people are publicly putting information about themselves in an online capacity. We can capture that information and start to understand things like where people go after graduation, what are the skill sets that they use in their work, and then how does that fit inside of this larger labor market trends, which we can see with work. So we can see work with job postings, we can see what employers are posting for, the skill sets that are most valuable for them, how they've been trending over time, and how that connects to people and education. So education, historically, we've used, iPads information or something like that, but this concept of innovation never rests, and what we'll get into here in a little bit is using skills as the connecting language or as a Rosetta Stone to better further that mission of connecting people, education, and work. So just a quick view then on some of the groups that we work with already. We work with the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, so John Fries, who's here with us on camera. So we work with his group, helping them with program development and using data to identify opportunities in the market for program growth. And then I was hoping that we actually are currently contracting with the University of Tennessee system to get them a similar tool in the system office. And I was hoping to swap out Arizona State University's logo here with the UT system, but I think the procurement process may have delayed us a little bit on that one. But in addition to more traditional higher education institutions, we also work with some of the more forward-thinking groups that you might think of, like Southern New Hampshire or Western Governors, some of these unbundled learning models or competency-based education groups, and then also enterprise corporations that are coming to us with kind of the flip side of the equation. So higher education institutions say, how can we use data to make strategic decisions about our direction forward? And companies come to us and say, we're trying to put in a second headquarters and we need to recruit 10,000 software developers over the next 2 years. What market do we need to tap into that's going to help us better supply the needs that we need from a talent development and workforce perspective? And so that's just a real quick overview of some of the ways that we work in different groups. And again, just highlighting that fact, the main takeaway here from the first section is that we really started off on the premise that higher education institutions function as economic engines, and that's going to be a consistent theme throughout the duration of this presentation. So next, we have Tennessee 2020, a year in review. And so I'm going to start with a few slides that are actually just looking at some of the trending occupations and job and companies that we saw in 2020, just to highlight the fact that 2020 was not entirely a bad year. I know lots of folks think that it is, and there's definitely things that weren't the best from an economic perspective, like unemployment rates being the highest in Tennessee that they've been in a few decades. But the main purpose of showing these slides is to better understand how Tennessee reacted as a state under COVID, the kinds of jobs that remained in demand, and the companies that stood out amongst the crowd. And so starting off then, we're actually just going to start with the top cities that remained very active in the job market throughout 2020. And so probably not surprising that Nashville is right up there at the top. But one of the reasons that I wanted to share this particular slide is that as you start going through this list and you see Nashville and Memphis, Knoxville, Chattanooga, and so on, something worth pointing out is the fact that there is a higher education institution or one or more higher education institutions in pretty much all of these markets. And being able to, as an institution, pay attention to the fact that there is economic activity even in a down year is going to be important for helping the regional economy bounce back. And I know there's a number of statewide initiatives elsewhere that we're involved in, a couple conversations in Texas and Tennessee about how Louisiana's initiative, Resilient Louisiana, trying to find ways that higher education institutions can engage with data about what's happening in the workforce to help kickstart the economy back and help re-employ some of these folks. So being able to identify what's actually happening in your region, where your institution fits inside of that, and the kinds of jobs that are available is pretty key to being able to help your regional economy succeed. So this next slide is focusing on the occupations that were resilient throughout 2020, and probably not surprising that we see things that are primarily surrounding transportation and healthcare, but also food service. And so the main point of showing this slide is just to demonstrate that there was not only economic activity, but there was actually significant growth inside of certain areas of the economy. And at the same time, not only was there growth in these types of occupations, but we've also seen certain companies that really rose above the rest as well. And so you can see here, these are the top companies that posted jobs during 2020. Inside of Tennessee, you'll notice kind of the big players that you would expect, like Amazon and Dollar General. But then you also have some other more shipping-focused shipping and retail companies as well. So it probably doesn't come as a surprise that shipping and retail and healthcare were the major players of 2020. But what may come as a little bit more of a surprise is when we take all of this data and we take those regions that were growing and actually had lots of activity in 2020 and connect that to some of the national trends that we've seen, that's where something starts to come into the picture pretty clearly. And so I want to introduce a concept. Every year for the past 4 or 5 years, Emsi has put out a document called the Talent Attraction Scorecard, where essentially what we do is we take 6 equally weighted measures across every single county in the United States, and we rank how attractive a particular region or county is based off of those factors. And so we look at things like net migration, overall job growth. We also break that out into skilled job growth as well, educational attainment, regional competitiveness, and then annual openings per capita. And so one of the things to really highlight here is this quote on the side of the slide. And the main purpose of this quote here is that in 2020, there was a huge shift to mid-sized markets, a massive shift to mid-sized markets, which we were already seeing a bit before. But the pandemic has been described by some less as a change event and more of an accelerator. And so there were quickly advancing trends already in motion in up to prior to 2020. And one such trend was the growing recognition that middle-sized cities are both an attractive place to live and work. And not only are they an attractive place to live and work, but for a more balanced economy, the success of markets other than super cities needs to be prioritized. And you can see that shift actually happening naturally in the economy with the top markets that we ranked in 2020. Over 50% of those were mid-sized markets. So places here, like we can see Spokane, Washington, just about an hour and a half north of Moscow, Ada County, which is right outside of Boise, Rutherford County here, and then, basically the vast majority of Florida. And one of the reasons that I want to highlight this is that as you start to attract more tech businesses and that you start to attract more of a skilled workforce, the question is, how do you then begin to think about what that means, the implications that that has for the existing workforce, for not only keeping them up to speed with this rapid development, but also making sure that you're preparing the next generation of employees and students to be prepared to go into a workforce that is becoming increasingly skills denominated. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but now that we've kind of looked at this trend going on of what's happening in the nation with shift towards mid-sized markets, I want to actually highlight some of the top markets that we've seen specifically in Tennessee. And so these are the top counties in Tennessee ranked by net migration and in conjunction with Emsi's Talent Attraction Scorecard rank. And so something to point out, or I guess a fun fact is that, and you can take this to a trivia night, or ask your friends and family if they know the answer to this. But there are 3,142 counties or county equivalents, if you're like Louisiana and want to be a little different, in the United States. So 3,142 counties. That puts these specific Tennessee counties in roughly the top 7% of all counties nationwide. And similar to the previous chart that we looked at, where we saw those top job posting cities and their associated higher education institutions, we could go through these counties one by one and point their associated higher education institutions, like Rutherford County with MTSU, Williamson County and Sumner County right outside of Nashville and pulling from Tennessee Tech and Vanderbilt. Montgomery County is APSU. Knox is obviously UT Knoxville, Hamilton, UT Chattanooga, and we can keep going further down this list. And so when you start to think about what is happening in your regional economy and your role inside of that economy as an economic engine, paying attention to the shifts and trends inside of the economy is going to help you better serve your the local population, which is in turn better going to help you achieve your goals as well. And so the majority of the key counties in Tennessee, in looking at these different factors that we looked at also with the Emsi Talent Attraction Scorecard, have major state universities or higher education institutions. And then what that means is implications for the whole state is when you start to think about that national trend of shifting towards mid-sized markets and what that means for these top counties in Tennessee. All of these counties in Tennessee could be perceived as some sort of mid-sized market in that they're not super cities, and Tennessee doesn't really have super cities in the way that New York or California does. But when you look at the net migration ranked nationally, these are actually pretty impressive numbers, and these are going to continue as this continued trend towards regional, more regional institutions continues as well. And so one thing I do want to just touch base on again is re-emphasize the fact that higher education institutions function as economic engines. And with this national shift towards mid-sized markets, Tennessee is a very hot state right now for not only folks coming in, but they're bringing businesses with them. You're bringing lots of money from the big cities, and you're bringing a more technologically advanced workforce as well that is going to accelerate the need for more skills-focused training and programs. The one thing I do want to just briefly mention, this isn't an argument for trade skills, but we'll talk about a shift in the education narrative here in just a second. But I do think there's an important thing to get ahead of is that while we're not arguing for trade skills, we are making an argument for the fact that higher education institutions should be cognizant and intentional with the skills they emphasize in the classroom, and not in a way that is, again, arguing for a particular trade. But we'll get into that here in just a second. So now, just as there's a shift in the workforce towards the mid-sized markets and towards remote work as well, there's also a fundamental shift in the U.S. and global economy towards what is being called a skills-denominated workforce. And what a skills-denominated workforce is that we're looking at a workforce that is increasingly technical in the different roles that we see that are prevalent. And so when you think of something like manufacturing and what that used to be 50 years ago versus what manufacturing is today, manufacturing is a far more technical industry than it was 50 years ago. You can also see that with things like cybersecurity or even more core business functions like marketing and sales. As you start to increase things like search engine optimization, Salesforce, different platforms and technologies that you need to interact with, it is becoming an increasingly skills-denominated and skills-focused workforce that is going to continue to do so and continue to, I guess, diversify over the coming years. And so when you think about a good way to, I guess, talk about this is, I'm not sure if we have anyone here that's familiar with economic data and might know some stuff about the BLS and the census, but when you think about the way that everyone in this presentation's jobs are classified, there's about 860 different occupation codes that the government uses to classify the many, many roles that are in this room already. And in Emsi's taxonomy, we want to go beyond that and actually make meaningful distinctions underneath of that level. And we have over 75,000 unique job titles that are subdivisions of those occupation codes. Now, it might just be that things are more viral now than they have been before, and there's increasing visibility into things like this. But the reality is that things are continuing to get more and more specific, and employers are looking for more and more specific kinds of employees. And so the emphasis there is similar to how the workforce is shifting to mid-sized markets. They're bringing those more technologically and skills-focused workforce into those mid-sized markets. And so that, coupled with the fact that Tennessee saw its highest unemployment rate in decades, the question is, how do you balance this increase in skilled workers with unemployment trends, with reemployment trends, and this desire for more skills-focused training programs? We can see a shift in kind of a national approach to this with the development of things like the interoperable learning record, groups that are really doubling down on finding ways to communicate skills outside or inside of more traditional programs as well, and connecting those. You can see this with shifts in like liberal arts colleges that have started partnering with groups like Coursera to offer more credential-specific programs on top of more traditional degree programs to make those students more marketable in the labor market, and things like that. And there's a recent study done, I love this quote, it was by the World Economic Forum and PricewaterhouseCoopers, where they focused on the value of upskilling to the global GDP. And one of the quotes that they said, or one of the things that they were really trying to drive home, is that even though there are millions of jobs that have been lost through the pandemic, that actually accelerated the process of automation and digitization, meaning that many of those jobs that were lost are unlikely to return. And so the focus of this paper was that we need new investments in the jobs of tomorrow and the skills that people need in order to move forward in these roles in education systems, and education systems that prepare young people or adult learners for a new economy and a new society that is more and more skills denominated. And so looking then at the shift in the kind of workforce narrative and how that connects to the education narrative, there is a recent survey done by the Strata Education Network, which is a large national nonprofit organization that Emsi is actually an affiliate member of. But in the most recent survey, and this is across not only adult learners, but looking across the board, Americans are strongly preferring non-degree programs and skills training over degree programs at 62%. And now this, again, could seem like an argument for trade schools, but one of the things that I want to propose here is that this conversation of skills and degrees, or skills versus degrees, is actually a false dichotomy. And the error isn't so much that higher education institutions are not preparing folks for this next generation of jobs or are not giving them marketable skills, but that it's more of a communication or translation problem. Higher education institutions have historically struggled to communicate those skills in a way that is going to be relevant to employers and relevant to the labor market. And so just to kind of sum up where we're at now, Tennessee is an attractive state. Higher education institutions are economic engines. There is an increase in a skills-denominated workforce and an increase in more skill communicative programs. And so higher education institutions really do have a phenomenal opportunity right now to capitalize on this shift in the workforce narrative by mimicking the language of the workforce so that they can better articulate and market themselves and further their own mission by advancing the workforce as well. So a good example of this concept of, skills and being relevant to the workforce is the fact that careers are often nonlinear. And we see that particularly with groups like the liberal arts, who actually have higher career mobility than their STEM counterparts. And when you think about an actual career path, I graduated from a liberal arts program and I now work in data analytics for a tech company. And so when you start to think about this career trajectory of moving into some of the expected roles that you might have for folks relative to what an actual career path looks like, you start to and actually dig into the data underneath of that. You realize that there are more non-STEM graduates working in the tech industry than there are STEM graduates. And that's because you have so many core business function roles. And furthermore, the human skills that are more emphasized in the liberal arts actually have a greater transferability across multiple job platforms or across multiple jobs than those more technical skills do, even though those more technical skills can get you a higher earning. And so, again, not an argument for trade school so much as being clear and articulate about those skills that you're preparing, whether it's in a liberal arts program or whether it is a more STEM-oriented field, can have a lot of not only increase your own visibility to folks that are using skills to search for the kinds of programs that they want to enroll in, but also help students better market themselves for the jobs that they could be eligible for. Another helpful stat here is this was a screenshot I took from a webinar, so please excuse the lack of graphic design. But this is some research by Guild Education that in the applications for certificates and trade programs, or for certificates in the 9 months pre-COVID and the 9 months, I guess, post-COVID or in the middle of COVID, has actually increased 149%. The level of the rate at which people are applying for more skills-focused certificates. And the question is, you know, what's at play here? Unemployment is definitely at play as folks are trying to find a way to give themselves an edge and to get reemployed in the labor market. But there's also the reality that the workforce is becoming increasingly skills denominated, and that if you want to be a valuable asset to your company or in the workforce, it is going to be a valuable and a worthwhile pursuit to pursue additional skill-focused training that will give you a competitive edge as we start to shift towards more of a skills-denominated workforce. And so the question then is for you all, with the workforce shifting more towards skills-based credentials and certificates, and the value of the four-year degree being questioned more and more, how do institutions position themselves to actually advance their mission of being traditional education providers and not turn into trade schools? And I think we would argue that you do that by trying to translate your curriculum into the language of skills, not only so that you can better understand what you're teaching in relation to the labor market, but so that you can better communicate to prospective students the value of a four-year degree beyond kind of anecdotal evidence. And so, like I said previously, the historic approach to higher education has been very, I guess, thought in terms of buckets. And so we've looked at zip codes and how IPEDS classifies programs and how that relates to things like the BLS or the census. And we see these different SOC codes and, or you know, ONET codes, or different ways of classifying occupations. But the reality is that as we get further and further down this line of skills denomination, we get further away from this mapping and this taxonomy making a lot of sense. Because you start to see things like this particular program trains you for these occupation codes, when in reality there's 1,000 different branches inside of that particular occupation code. And how do you know that you're, or how do you start to think about different concentrations in a way that you can emphasize certain routes inside of that? Beyond just looking at particular occupation codes. And so the argument then with skills as the connecting language, people and jobs are already speaking this language. So you can think of resumes. When folks list their relevant work experience, they're listing out the different skill sets that they have and why they would be a valuable asset to a particular company. And companies, vice versa, are listing the different skill sets that they're looking for in employees. And so there's already this direct connection of skills going back between people and jobs. But the historic problem, again, is how do you get education curriculum not to change, but to reflect the labor market skills that are already embedded inside of a program? And so that's where some of the work that we've been doing here at Emsi comes into play, where we actually have the technology to similarly how we can scroll through, you know, millions of resumes and tens of millions of job postings and billions of data points from social media networks. We can actually do the same thing with course descriptions, with syllabi documents, and in the same way that we can surface the skills inside of job postings and profiles, we can also surface those skills inside of curricular content, which is a project that we just recently did with the Eli program. And so lots of times you can anticipate feedback from faculty with something like this, pushing back and, you know, we aren't trade programs, but what we're arguing for here is not describing your curriculum in a way that is prescriptive and says that it needs to change, so much as it is descriptive, and being able to actually surface what you're teaching and how that relates to the labor market, and being intentional and cognizant of those relationships. And so that being said, skills is the connecting language between those groups, and you can use that to be as specific and flexible as you want, identifying ways that your students are being blessed by your programs and that you can better serve them and help them better market themselves, and allows you to be able to quickly adapt and improvise and change because you can pinpoint those areas that might need revision or pinpoint the areas that you should double down on. So some applications for different skills work. There's opportunities for institutions if they translate their curriculum into skills, and that's visibility into how the skills that you're teaching are distributed across programs and content. So a good way to think about that is actually a skills inventory, where you can fully inventory the skill sets that you're emphasizing and how those are separated across the institution. And so if you need to, or if you're aware of the fact that a particular computer science program is teaching an outdated coding language, you may be teaching that inside of a finance program that's focused on financial analysis. And if you've inventoried that, you can actually be able to utilize your current resources without having to look for, creating additional courses or potentially hiring additional faculty members. You can better inventory that and see how that relates to the labor market to help you be more flexible in those conversations. Another one is insights from market skill supply and market skill demand. So that's that taught skill, sought skill analysis, which I'll show a visual of here in just a second. But looking at how skills that you're teaching relate to the skills that are sought in the marketplace, which is going to be helpful not only for things like helping your students better market themselves, but corporate engagement, being able to take advantage of those new businesses that are coming to your regions for a consistent education pipeline by being aware of how what you're teaching relates to what they're looking for in the workforce. And as a result, tailor curriculum and credentials to stakeholder needs, whether that's for students or employer engagement or a host of other applications. You're able to identify opportunities for your curriculum to grow and expand and benefit others. And then lastly, provide a foundational language and framework for partnerships with corporations and workforce development. So lots of these tie together and overlap with one another, as skills is really a connecting language that bleeds into lots of areas inside of the regional economy. Just a quick visual on that taught skill versus sought skill to help maybe solidify it a little bit more. Thinking of taught skills as the skills that are delivered by institutional programs and content, not only certificates or credentials, but inside of four-year programs and two-year programs and master's degrees and PhDs, and seeing how those taught skills relate and overlap with the skills for your target occupations for graduates. And so by taking those two things and being aware of the skills that are in demand and the skills that you are supplying, you can have that overlap of where your skills and your programs are aligned with workforce needs and where there's a gap and where there's a surplus. And again, not in a way that is necessarily prescriptive, but in a way that is descriptive and is going to help you just have better and more clear communications with a variety of partners. So just to sum up that in some 4 really short and sweet bullet points, you can better align your programs with the market needs. You can better engage employers. You can better market programs to students. We have a number of institutions that are using us from a search engine optimization standpoint and looking at the kinds of ways that folks are searching for and ending up on certain landing pages and figuring out how they can market the skills that are internal to their programs to that larger audience and actually increase their web visibility, and then also better equip students to market themselves. Now I'm going to pivot here a little bit, moving away from this concept of the number of things that we talked about, just to rehash all of that. Higher education institutions are economic regions. Tennessee is growing. The workforce is becoming skills denominated, and that higher education institutions have an incredible opportunity to capitalize on that workforce shift in their own offerings and in the way that they're communicating what distinguishes their institution from another. And so moving here with the Executive Leadership Institute, we actually did a similar project with them where we actually started off with that skills tagging process, and we looked at the different core competencies that are relevant to the Executive Leadership Institute and saw how that benchmarks against the jobs that it's trying to train you for. And so opportunities for institutions, more specifically to Eli in this opportunity, is in looking at the skill demand from employers, we're able to see a more granular view of students' educational needs and interests. So we can identify the target occupations that you all are trying to get into, whether it's a provost role, whether it's a president role, vice provost, vice president, higher education leadership positions, identify those needs and interests and start to identify the skill sets and experiences that those institutions are looking for in their next president or their next provost. And then we're able to, as a result, once we've skill tagged that curriculum, we can facilitate personalized learning paths for those individuals where we can identify your skills as an individual, the skills that you need to acquire in order to get into those next positions, or at least in order to be more desirable and eligible for those kinds of positions, map that gap, and then provide education and training in a way that is cognizant of where you are, aware of where you're trying to get to, and then can provide education to supply those skills in between those two steps, which in turn helps maximize the value you're getting from your learning investment. And that also, in addition to not only helping in those current conversations, if you are continuously on top of the different skills that are in the labor market, you're going to be able to identify new and emerging fields quicker than, I guess, if you think of something like cybersecurity, which, you know, there's no occupation code for, is relatively new to the labor market, but is an incredibly technologically advanced and specialized field. You can identify those trends and skill sets up beforehand so that you can actually better design programs and curriculum that is going to map into those cutting edge fields based on those signals that we receive from employers. And so that said, we started off looking at the different skills that are in demand for the roles of presidents and provosts. We ran this through our job posting technology, and we're able to identify the skill sets that are most relevant to those higher education leadership positions. And so these are some of the top hard skills that showed up. And here on the left side, we can see the frequency that these skills show up in job postings. So these are for the actual job postings for VPs, vice chancellors, chancellors, provosts. And we just have the top 10 here surfaced, but we can have insight into the frequency that these skills show up in demand and the frequency that these skills actually show up on folks who are in these roles on their resumes and on their profiles. So you can see the way that the current market is communicating the skill sets that they have relative to the way that the actual institutions are saying what they need from employees. And so this is, again, the hard skills. We could see things like strategic planning, enrollment management, curriculum development, fiscal policies. And then the one that's also really jumped out at Dr. Smith and I when we were doing this is the liberal arts. The importance of articulating and communicating the value of the liberal arts is a very prevalent skill set to the next generation of higher education leaders. As we've seen with this shift in the labor market towards being more skills denominated, you can see how that would increase questions about the value of the liberal arts, when in reality, as we've talked about already, they're incredibly valuable programs. And then we also have top expected more soft skills as well, like leadership, planning, research, innovation, and operations, governance, things along those lines. And similar skill frequency versus in the job postings versus in those profiles. And so the purpose of showing you this is if you are going to apply for, you know, a position and you're trying to get in front of some search committees, being aware of the specific skills that they're looking for in a machine readable way so that your resume can actually surface more readily when they're scanning through it is going to be incredibly important for increasing, you know, how easily you can get in front of these people. So being cognizant of those skill sets that are in a particular target occupation and the skills that you have, and figuring out how you can better market yourself to those employees to get your foot in the door and at least get that next conversation. So what we did is we started off again with those 6 core competencies, and I'll try to wrap things up here as we're coming up on time. But we did start with those 6 core competencies. start with the description, and we identified the different skills that are in the program. And I built it out. There is a software platform that we built it out in, but I think it's at the moment probably easier just to pull this up and show you all. But I did build it into Excel as well. And so similar to how we can scan and parse all of the skills that are inside of job postings and profiles, we can do the same thing for skills that are inside of education programs. So we identified the skills that are focus of the ELI program. We're able to focus on then the skills that we can see in the job market from a hard skill perspective. We can see that from the common skill perspective as well, how frequent they show up in profiles and the frequency in postings. Kind of show the overlap. And then I also tested it across 6 different individual job postings for different provost and president positions across a number of institutions. And so kind of the main thought here is not to really dig into the weeds of the specific or really specific findings of that, but more to talk about the concept and the implications that that has for you. And so Dr. Smith, when we went through that, we were able to surface things like the value of the liberal arts and making sure that that is a key point and emphasizing in the curriculum your ability to articulate the value of the liberal arts and also those more technical skills as well. And again, connect it all back to the curriculum of this program wants to speak the language of the workforce, speak the language of the institutions who are going to hire you for these roles, is machine readable, which is a pretty key factor as well, as more and more search committees and whatnot are using technology to scan through resumes and weed out some of the groups that folks that might not be a good fit just based on the way that they describe their work experience, is connected at the skill level to the market supply of what's out there, the market demand of what are employers looking for, be able to identify those trends as things ebb and flow, and then is just strategically data driven, being intentional with the curriculum, being intentional with what Dr. Smith is emphasizing in the classroom, and then optimizing that for the kind of market that you're going into. So the reality is that as the labor market gets more and more skills denominated, so does the labor market for higher education institutions as well. And what's relevant for a VP of Enrollment Management in California might not be as relevant to a VP of Enrollment Management in Tennessee or New York. And being cognizant of those subtle differences can help better prepare you for your specific career aspirations and goals. And so some of the main takeaways: ELI's curriculum is preparing students well to be the next generation of higher education leaders, and in being cognizant and aware of the skill sets that are in demand, that's only helping further that mission and further the awareness of what is trending in the market and how to prepare you, and using big data to guide those conversations. And the skills that a president and provost need can vary by region and institution. So in doing those 6 kind of temperature gauges with those different president and provost roles across different institutions in different regions, being able to surface that not all institutions are looking for the same skill set in a president and a provost, and being aware of what they're looking for and the role that you want to get is going to help you better market yourself as an individual. And then liberal education. It's not about converting institutions to trade schools. There is a huge value in the liberal arts, not only from an education standpoint, but from an education leader standpoint, in articulating the value and being aware of the implications that, or being aware of the career pathways of liberal arts grads and the multiple fields that they can go into. And lastly, one of the big takeaways is that curriculum transparency is good for everyone. It's good for students who can more, in time and real time map that to the career path that they want to get into. It's good for employers who will have an easier job finding that talent they're looking for. It's easier for employees who are trying to identify opportunities for career growth. And it's good for higher education institutions and academics who are trying to attract students and also serve students in a way that is going to prepare them well. Whether or not that's the main purpose, there's obviously, I'm a huge believer, being a liberal arts graduate myself, in the philosophy behind education and the value of education for the sake of education. But at the same time, I am a product of my higher education opportunity, a product of my higher education institution, and that they were the ones that prepared me and provided me with the skill sets to get me into a tech field and into a tech role. And so that's where we're going to wrap up here, at least for my portion of the presentation. It looks like there have been some questions that have come through in the chat. And so maybe what we can do is just open that up and see how on top of it Scott and Morgan were, and if we need to circle back anything. And feel free to interrupt with any questions that you may have at this point as well.
Yeah, so there was a handful around the talent attraction scorecard that we're helping David with offline. Some good comments from Misty about competency-based education being an integral part of veterinary medical education. Being careful not to focus so much on skills that create veterinary technicians instead of doctors of veterinary medicine. So most of them we were able to get into an answer here. So probably Josh, just want to kind of open it up for live Q&A.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Scott and Morgan. That said, I know that we covered a lot of information here in a very short time, and I'm curious I'd be kind of surprised if there weren't questions, but I also know that breaking the ice can be tough as well.
I have a question. Joshua?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you found institutions that have been successful in getting their higher ed authorities for public institutions to change their funding models? So I'm not talking about undergraduate education where you would map the skills to the curriculum, but if you're talking about micro-credentialing or giving small kind of short bursts of certificates for the funding model for higher education institutions, because it tends to be based on retention and graduation. And so I just wondered if you'd seen successful lobbying of higher ed boards.
Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure on kind of the successful lobbying across the board, but one thing that I do know is there have been a number of groups that you can see that they have some sort of global campus or some online competency-based group inside that is fiscally independent and that has kind of its own mission. So I think the University of Maryland, Baltimore County has an institution like that. I know Purdue Global's group is pretty independent. You have groups like University of Arkansas Global, lots of actually the groups that have global after them. It's a pretty good indicator of how they're being funded, apart from kind of how the rest of the institution might be. So I know that's kind of the hotspot that we've seen with competency-based education and certificates and stackable credentials and things like that. But there are also groups I'm maybe gonna not give as firm an answer on that because I'm not sure about that specific lobbying question, but there are institutions that have adopted more of a competency-based approach for the entire institution. And you can think of Southern New Hampshire University. You can think of unbundled learning models like Purdue Global. You also have a very skills-oriented one group that's doing a ton of work with Emsi on this field is Western Governors University, who has tagged all of their curriculum to Emsi skills taxonomy so that they can do exactly what we talked about today. So Dr. Marnie Stein, Lori, is the provost over at WGU, and she's kind of full in. She's written some great articles. If Scott and Morgan, you might want to drop one or two in the chat in case folks are interested to see what WGU has done.
Hey, Joshua, this is David Butt. I've got a question for you. The labor market is probably more dynamic than I've ever seen it, both in terms of their needs and its shift, geographical shift and movement to automation. One of your slides showed the huge demand in this market for long-haul truck drivers. And I think that's very interesting. You can make a pretty decent living. However, with autonomous driving coming faster than a lot of people realize, and the trucking fleet being the #1 processing, you can literally skill up a trucking fleet, with 1 million workers, and then within a couple of years, every one of those skill sets need to disappear. How do you have such a niche skill if you sort of build a sort of competency base or skill base and then pivot from something that's so niche into a displaced 1 million worker, citizens out there, and what was a valuable career and industry where people had families and supporting them to now is not transferable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And that comes back to this notion of skills. I guess what you said there at the end is non-transferable skills transferability and how those skills actually do transfer across the labor market. So if you are thinking of yourself as an individual in terms of, at least as far as the workforce is concerned, the different skills and experiences that you have, if you've connected those down to the skill level, you can identify near occupations that would be good for cross-training and upskilling based off of the skill requirements from one position to another. And so we've done, we do have an automation index that kind of ranks occupations based on the likelihood that they'll be automated and the rate at which we'll see that over time. And then we've also done research on how skills will transfer from one job to the next. And so I guess to the specific question about the trucking fleet, I don't have any ideas off the top of my mind, but I would say that in being aware of the skills that they have and how that actually could transfer over occupations, I bet there's a far bit more overlap than they initially realize. And kind of anecdotally in my mind, you know, the more autonomous trucks and drivers that you have, the more those cars are going to need to be repaired and worked on. And I could easily see a world in which you can cross-train the skill sets that they currently have into those more technical mechanic type roles. So to speak specifically to the trucking portion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But the difference between driving one and repairing one is a big leap up.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're looking at is not just cross skills, we're looking at cross and then up skills.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's where I think, if I can hop back to this slide here, if you think this as maybe ignore the words here, if we think about this as the skills of an individual relative to the skills of an emerging market, you can identify with those personalized learning recommendations the skills of overlap that they do have, the surplus skills that they have to get into the market, and then the skill gap that they don't have. And then you can actually create certificates or competencies that will help prepare them transition by upskilling and reskilling, if that makes sense.
It does. And the other question I have is, having studied the contact center industry for decades, there was a weird disconnect where you actually had loggers in Oregon that were unemployed because they weren't logging, and there's a huge need for contact center employment. But the mostly men who were out there logging did not want to take off their boots and their hats and stuff and go into and sit in a desk for 8 hours answering customer service questions. They would rather be displaced or actually take a lower paying job just to be outside. There was a strange cultural shift where there was a labor market demand and supply, which you thought would be an equilibrium, but the nature of the work and the nature of the people did not mesh up.
I could follow on to David's question, give you a good example of this in Chattanooga, Joshua. The drivers, we have so many big logistics and trucking companies here. They do compete some to retain drivers who will move to new firms for just a few dollars, more, a few cents more a mile, really. They've been trying to do that with education, but the biggest player in town who does that is actually using Ashford University, which is, I just consider scandalous given their completion rates. I find what they're doing practically criminal, but we're not in the game at all. And at UTC, because we don't move with any of the speed, we don't move with any of the payment requirements, both from the employer and from the drivers themselves. And they've got to have incredible flex. To your point about, it seems to work best in places that are already business units that are already set up to deliver just competency-based education. I think we found that, because I tried for 3 years to get something going in that space here at UTC and was unfortunately not successful myself.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, maybe speaks a little bit to Lori's point as well, is that the shift is, difficult. There are education institutions that are doing it, and oftentimes, at least in our interaction, just because you can imagine how you would get pushback from internal stakeholders about shifting more towards skills-focused work or things along those lines. And that's why the rhetorical stance of, it is descriptive, it's not prescriptive, and you're trying to increased flexibility and increased visibility and helping better market your programs and how to help better market students themselves. That's been an extremely successful tool with talking to faculty members who might be a little bit reticent to move down that more skills denominated education path.
If I could just say, thank you very much. I could get really down into the narrow specifics of my particular discipline and field and all about the how-to skills. But then as I heard you speak and speaking in general about skills and thinking about some of those soft skills that really transcend across different disciplines and the arts and the sciences and things, and they're all relevant depending upon what level an individual's coming into the workforce. Wow, like communication and teamwork and organization skills and things like that. When we look at our curriculum outlined in the graduate or the undergraduate catalogs, I think we've done a really good job from our perspective of saying the content, you will learn this about the subject or the content of whatever that course is titled, but maybe certainly should be doing a more detailed look about also those other skills that they're learning in the continuum of learning content, but the different exercises and the approaches we take in and out of the classroom certainly help their learning about things that will go well beyond their major and things. And I guess that's what I was really thinking about as you were talking about that, and saw that this is relevant for animal science or any of the other disciplines that we think about. So thank you. You definitely got me thinking in ways that I wasn't before you gave your presentation. So I appreciate that.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate the comment. And we do have a couple more minutes before we have to end the session here. My contact information was on the last slide there. I'm just going to pull it back up for a quick second. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to go over any of this research, in more detail. If you have more questions or potential applications to your work, we're happy to talk. So feel free to shoot me an email and we can take things from there. But I guess I'll hand it back over to Dr. Smith for our closing remarks.
Josh, thank you very much for this presentation. You have created a lot of ideas and a lot of possibilities out of this. In today's Chronicle of Higher Education, although it was originally posted a few days ago, was a really disturbing statistic that I think we have to pay attention to. Higher education since January of 2020 has lost 650,000 jobs, which means that, and those are not the collateral jobs that come from various vendors like food service, hospitality, some of the other businesses that are highly dependent upon being on a campus. That's 650,000 employed by colleges and universities across all sectors. I think it is problematic that all 650,000 of those jobs are going to come back. So it is becoming more and more competitive within our own sector. And if, as you did for me, I align that the skills that are being sought are the skills that are being taught, and then the ability to communicate that so that people can recognize it. I should mention that when Josh did this for the program, when he's talked about employers, he's really talking about at our level, search committees. So those came out of the profiles for the positions. And if we're not aligned with those profiles, then your resume doesn't get tagged. If that doesn't get tagged, you don't get interviewed. And nobody I know has ever been hired into the position without an interview. So it is simple probability, but it isn't about us. It's about what are we doing for our students. And with more and more parents asking as the first question, and I remember this as both chancellor and as president, tell me that at graduation, he's not going to live at home. And I would say that's our goal, to provide a tremendous opportunity for a very, very successful career, and then take care of you when you're in your elder lives. And those parents would just beam and say, well, that meets both of our goals. Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate Emsi. You guys have been very, very special for me over the years, and I'm grateful to the relationship that we've had. Thank you. And with that, to the people that joined us today, thanks for being part of this. Part 2 will pick up. Our organization is Ellucian. If you don't know who Ellucian is, talk to your IT people. They'll tell you. And you'll see the same kind of interesting analyses and thoughtful concepts for that second session that's going to be scheduled in a few weeks. But with that, we're out. Thank you all for being part of this program.